Welcome to Hot Takes, brought to you by 50cupstea.com, where united we sip, discuss, and learn. Join us as we dive into the hottest takes on culture, business trends, and the threads that bind us. Get ready for inspiring stories, candid conversations, and a fresh perspective on living a healthy, fulfilled life. Grab your cup and tune in. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 50 Cups Hot Takes. This is a special edition. Every once in a while, we feature extraordinary people. And today, I'm proud to introduce Ted Phillips to you. Ted and I worked together way back in the early days of my company, and it was back then called Atlantic Search Group, and we otherwise were known as ASG. And as always, I'm going to interview Ted today and drink some world famous Earl Gray tea from 50 Cups. So let me pour it into my cup here. Ted, I'm sure you're not a tea guy. You're probably drinking your coffee.
Yeah, the coffee's done. We'll drink some world famous Poland spring water from up here in Maine.
Sounds good. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where could we start? There's so much. Well, as you mentioned, yes, the first time we got a chance to meet was when I interviewed at ASG. So that was the start of what has now become a long career in talent acquisition. What else can I tell you a little bit about myself? I live up here in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Moved here about 15 years ago with my 3 boys. And so right now they are actually squatting officially. So that's where I look at that. And the dog. And we enjoy plenty of snow all year round. It's kind of funny. People often ask, you must love it up there because it snows for 6 months. And I said, yeah, it's wonderful. You sit outside. You sit inside and then you look outside and then go shovel. I don't ski or anything. I'm getting too old for that.
So you and I worked together back in like the early 90s, wasn't it?
92, right out of college. You were one of the first ads I answered back then out of the Stanford Advocate, if you remember. You used to run the ad back in real papers back then. I think the story I tell people is my parents, after graduating from Syracuse, asked me what did I learn, which just meant just go find a job. And then I answered your ad for a researcher, given that I was a history major. And that's all she wrote at that point. So I remember coming in for the interview and talking about a number of things, many of which included the Big East. We were talking about the Big East. We're talking about the election at that time. I think Mr. Ross Perot was actually running. We talked about how someone with a business background needed to run the country, how ironic we are here today.
Yeah, that's true. And we were, I look back on the company and obviously we were bootstrapping at that point in time, just trying to generate as much business as possible. And, we're going around to conferences and, you're on the cot, my brother's in one bed, I'm in the other bed. And then we rotated every time we went. So I had the cot sometimes as well. And I can't, now that I'm older and obviously sold the business, I'm kind of stunned that, I made people share rooms back then.
Well, yeah, that's an HR nightmare. And I do remember that first conference. I remember it vividly. I'm still working with my therapist on that. No, I'm just kidding with you. We walked into the room. I remember bags, you, me, and Mike, and I put my bag down. I said, okay, see you guys later. And you didn't leave. So I said, hey, this is how this goes. I think that was a SaaS conference, obviously, right? It was a Suji conference. It must have been.
Yeah. And we'd have a contest to see who had got the most business cards when we were networking every day. And because we were too cheap to even put a booth up. So we just went around trying to talk to people all day long.
Yeah, I remember that. I was kind of shy in the beginning, obviously out of college and just not having done a real job, actually, if you will, for the lack of a better term. And I remember you just standing there with me and we're at the conference. Like you said, no booth or anything like that. And you said, go ahead. And I said, go ahead, where? What, do you need some coffee? What do you need, Jim? He said, go just start introducing yourself to people. And that's kind of where it all took off.
Yeah. So there were some fun times. And I remember after you left a few years later, I was taking a couple of females to another conference. And they were a little bit older. And, I had brought them in from industry. And, they were used to the big pharmaceutical way of travel. And we went to check in. I think it was up in Worcester, Massachusetts, in fact, and we went to check in and checked in for them, and I came back and I gave them one key. And I think her name was Susan. She said, where's the other key? And I said, there's only one. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, oh, you guys are sharing a room. Yeah, almost literally quit me at that point in time. And I felt so bad. I went back to try to get them an extra room, but the hotel was sold out. So uh, they sucked it up for the night. And I think within probably a month, they had resigned at that point.
Yeah, there was no buddy system back then, right? Yeah.
So you're one of the few people over the course of your 30-year career or so that have stayed in talent acquisition the whole time. And it's obviously a job that is, if you're good at it, is very rewarding, but it's also wildly frustrating and stressful since you're dealing with human beings and you think you got a deal done and, then the human being decides to say no, on the Friday at 5 o'clock, kind of thing. So kind of walk us through your career and how you, and what do you do to maintain your level of sanity?
Well, it's a great question. And it's so true because I think even when we were working together, one of the stats you had sent me on a little course where I was studying and it said something along the lines of 1 in 5 might stay past a year in recruiting. And yes, it's my 33rd year. It's taken its toll. I used to be 6'4" and blonde. You can look at now and see what happened. It's awful. But it's been a great career. I think, you have to love it. You actually had asked me, I remember this in our first interview as well, what do you think the hardest part about recruiting is? I had no clue. But you indicated the same thing. It's you're selling a person, in effect, for the lack of a better term. You're trying to sell a person a job versus an actual tangible product. And I think that that's both extremely challenging, but extremely rewarding when you see someone find a position or you help them and find a position. True. I think you can have some of the craziest stories. I think one of them back then at ASG, we were trying to close a deal on a biostatistician. And she said it's 5 miles too far south and therefore my pollen's too high. So she couldn't take the job. And it was a Friday nonetheless. So I do remember those kind of days. It's always a Friday. Absolutely. It's either good or bad news on a Friday. But I think you have to have the love of it and you have to just love doing what you do, sales and interacting with people. I can talk to people all day long, and that's exactly what you need to do and be successful in this career.
So during your career too, you've obviously worked for companies, but you're off on your own as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 22 years. I think it was about 22 or 23 years on my own. I started, it was very exciting. It gave me a lot of time with my boys. I think I went for every single one of their field trips for all 3 of them, except for 2 from K through 12. So they hated it. Their therapist can deal with them. And I enjoyed all of it. It was wonderful to have that flexibility. But towards the end, the last several years, I missed, it became too operational. Too many things have to do with large RFPs, whatever you might have to be doing to gather that business. Whereas the old days, we could go into New York, go to Pfizer, have lunch, and off you go, and you're working your tail off. So I missed the interaction pieces of it. And a couple of years pre-COVID and post-COVID, I've been in small biotechs as well as where I currently am.
And has the industry changed over the years?
Fundamentally, no. In terms of the ins and outs and the ups and downs, I mean, it's gotten harder more recently, I believe. It's gone through quite a hard time, obviously, as you well know, lately, but I don't know how much it's technically changed. Depends on what you're looking at, right? I mean, the industry recruiting itself doesn't change. It changes with respect to how you approach it, but you always have to have that people skill ability in order to achieve anything. So whether it's AI or whatever the changes might be, you still have to have the person behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering if there's a big push with AI now with the clients basically that you're dealing with where, hey, I can just use AI to go find somebody so I don't need you anymore.
It's a great question. People get very nervous about it, but I still hold back to it really comes down to the candidate experience. If you're providing a white glove service to your hiring managers and a red carpet experience to your candidates, you will far and beyond exceed expectations. And that's what we do here where we are. We really focus on the candidates and the manager's experience and so forth, try to win our awards and look at, get your ratings online. You can't really have good ratings on Glassdoor or things along those lines if you don't have that human interaction piece of it. And so there's always going to be that human interaction. AI is a great tool. It will not replace people. Basically, you'll be replaced if you don't use it. So it's really understanding it and using it rather than being scared of it.
So you were in Connecticut with us, and now you're up in New Hampshire. One quick story. We used to rate the drivers in our company, and you were number 1 when you were there. You literally, I think, went down Fifth Avenue in New York in like 10 seconds. We had to go about 3 miles, and it was probably the most exhilarating ride I ever had in my life. Where did you learn your driving skills, number one? And number two, how did you get to New Hampshire?
So I learned my driving skills, I think, actually working with you and going all the time down to clients, right? So we were in Connecticut and most of the clients were either up in Massachusetts. For the most part, we're down in Philly or the Philly area outside. So if you remember, I would always take the car, that beautiful teal Korean Dam, whatever that was. I don't know, probably the only one sold ever. And then they stopped production, but would drive that thing all up and down the Jersey, Turnpike, and you just had to learn very quickly. So I loved to drive. I still love to drive. I still probably drive 25,000 miles a year and I don't even really go anywhere. So it just, right? A lot of gas in the truck. As for getting to New Hampshire, about 20 years ago, about 22 years ago, when my youngest was about 1 or 2, a friend from college had called and said, do you want to go visit this place up in New Hampshire called Storyland? It's basically a place for kids right south of Mount Washington. I said, sure. And I was in Stamford at the time with the youngest, threw him in the car seat, and for 6 hours, heard him scream the whole way up. So a wonderful ride and experience, but never stopped coming up, and ultimately bought a second home here. And then ultimately we rented that home for a while, in terms of while living in Connecticut. And then Connecticut, after my parents passed away, there really wasn't a whole lot holding me there. There wasn't a lot of family or anything. And, it made it financial sense to come up here, up north. And that's how I'm here for about the last 13 years now, full time.
And you were kind of doing the virtual thing before it became the vogue thing after COVID. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I was always trying to push clients to do virtual as well, right? You hire some virtual candidates who certainly would have made money faster that way too, but well ahead of its time. And really by default, really. I had an office for a while when I had my company. I had a couple employees as well. That got old as well. And then ultimately packed back in and worked from home from there on in. So yeah, the last 15, closer to 20 years, it's all been virtual. So no issue with COVID as a pivot. It was very simple. In fact, I enjoy going down to our corporate headquarters where I currently am down in Massachusetts. I tell them, you buy me lunch, I'm there. So.
And for those that work virtual still, and it seems to be there's some pressure now to get everybody back into an office. How do you remain relevant virtually? Like, what are some of the tips and techniques that you do to make sure that you're not forgotten and you're not the first guy that goes, when it's time to cut some people?
Sure. It's a great question. I mean, you have to engage yourself. You cannot just sit back and say, I can do my job, shut down your systems and just kind of crawl in a hole and do your work. You do have to engage. You have to engage with your coworkers, your manager. I'm constantly in calls with folks. And even if I don't necessarily have to be on a call, I'll say, hey, do you want to hop on a call rather than just sending an email, just to have that interaction. Our company is also a completely virtual company, although we have some physical office locations. So we do a lot in HR with respect to engaging the population, our workforce, if you will. So we might have virtual events. We might have coffee with our CEO. We do, for instance, a walk to wellness for Mental Health Awareness Month, where we all get on an app and we walk. It's not supposed to be competitive, but you go through a couple pairs of shoes trying to keep up. So there are a lot of things that you can do to stay relevant, and it's always very important. You have to be involved basically as much as you can be, and you would expect that from a recruiter as well, of course.
So let's talk a little bit about your health. So obviously you got the boys, you're moving, you got your business and everything else. And then what was it, about 10, 12 years ago or so?
About 2017. So I had an episode where I ended up in the hospital, and it was actually just before that. I take that back a step. Maybe about 2016, I was working out at a gym, and I was, not a big workout, but it's enough to feel like you're doing something. And I felt this like pop in my head, and I said, geez, what was that? That was really strange. Never heard that or felt that. It hurt. And I had gone to the doctor, and they said, your blood pressure is very, very high. I said, well, that's why I'm at the gym. And they said, no, we need you to go. And so I ended up having to go to the hospital that day. And after a battery, that was down in Bridgeport actually at the time. So that's a wonderful experience down there in Bridgeport Hospital. With that being said, as I was walking out, one of the doctors, a young guy, it's like a Doogie Howser type, right? He came up to me and said, you really should be checked for MS or for lupus. And I said, okay, that's great. Can I leave now? Right? You kind of just want to get out of there at the moment. Went home, didn't think much of it. He said, a lot of times lupus or that, because we saw some white matter on the CAT scans, when they did the CT scan. And they said a lot of times in young men, at that time I was younger, of course, high blood pressure is one of the only signs for lupus because it's very rare for men and it's also even rare for white men. So with that respect, I once got tested and sure enough, I had lupus. So that was not something that I had expected, of course. I didn't feel like I was experiencing any type of symptoms or any issues with that. But shortly thereafter, I did end up with trouble with my liver. So I ended up in liver failure back in 2017. I was up here at that time. So my dates might be a little off from when I first was diagnosed. It might have been a little earlier, but 2017 was the first time up here that I was diagnosed with liver failure.
All right, so let's just backtrack for a second. What was your BP? Like, what caused them to concern?
That was about 190 over 110, 120. They said I walked into the ER sideways because the doctor said you should just go get checked out. And so I kind of remember just going, saying, yeah, I probably should be there. But they just, as soon as I walked through the doors, they came running because they could see I was white as a ghost and kind of walking differently where I shouldn't have been.
And then after you were diagnosed with lupus, did they put you on the typical biologic that helps with lupus or some type of medication?
Not at that time. I went down to rheumatology down there in, it was Norwalk at the time, and they had indicated they wanted to kind of watch it a little bit, see what was going on. I don't think there wasn't much in terms of that. I, being stubborn and younger at the time, said, I'm fine. There's no need to worry about this. And of course that was ignorant, of course, at all kinds of levels. So ultimately there was some medicine that was given, but at that point, like I said, I was having issues with the liver and ultimately continued to deteriorate after that 2017 first episode.
So was the liver related to the lupus or is the liver totally separate?
Well, it's related to the lupus because when I had a transplant, of course, as we'll go into, but when the transplant, I asked them, what did you see? And they can tell from the pathology of the liver what caused it. And they could see the different type of inflammation caused by the lupus. It's an interesting story because when I had just graduated from college, I was actually diagnosed with fatty liver disease. And that's something that I said, okay, that's understood. That suggested weight loss. My middle son actually was diagnosed with that too when he was about 12. So we think it's hereditary to that extent. But I think that was the precursor. And, had I paid more attention perhaps back then, when you're 22, you're not really thinking anything other than a little blood work. And, you seem invincible at that point.
Sure. So, but with the lupus though, you didn't have all the other symptoms. You didn't have the shadow
fly rash.
Right.
Yeah. You got a rash on your face or no, typical symptoms did not present. And also, of course, lupus typically attacks the kidneys first for most people. And I didn't have any issues there either. So there wasn't anything found until, like I said, that later on with that episode.
So now you're got the liver to deal with. And what are they doing with that? I mean, put more medication at that point in time, diet, like what was the...
Diet and then waiting. There really wasn't medicine that was really used at that time. We're just monitoring blood levels. Ultimately, a biopsy was taken down there as well to see what stage it's in and kind of going from there. So that was really how that was managed until it just got to the point where it continued to get worse. And as it got worse, then it just, went a little bit sideways from there. So that last year or so during COVID, but I'll let you guide the questions there.
Yeah, you keep jumping ahead of me a little bit.
I know.
So the liver is what, 2018, 2019 timeframe?
Yeah.
Okay.
17 first failure. Then I was still working a little bit. I was working part-time at the local hospital here at that time, recruiting physicians. And then it got worse, especially late 18 into most of 19, really started to get a lot of complications from it. You could have blood infections, all kinds of different episodes. And then ultimately, I was in the hospital Christmas of late 19 going into the new year. And I spent all of 2020 in the hospitals, different hospitals, Massachusetts, Maine Med, as I was just basically trying to survive and get through that. And that was during COVID. So that was a lot of fun. Even the nurses wouldn't come in and see you. So
what was that?
Kind of lonely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you were, thankfully they let you go to the hospital because I know some people at the time needed significant care and they weren't even allowed to go in. And
right.
So they bring you to the Hotel California, but then nobody's paying attention to you.
Pretty much, yeah. Let you sit in there in a nice white room and, think that it was like The Shining, right? You're going crazy. You're just like, yeah.
So how do they get you on a transplant list? And I think there's is it called a Melton score or something like that? So why don't you walk us through all that whole process?
Sure. Unfortunately, some of that is a little bit of a blur, believe it or not, in terms of that. And I guess thankfully as well, some of the things that I went through. But you're right. You have to have your score needs to be certain levels. And until you hit that level, you really can't be considered for a transplant. And you have to be very sick at that point. You really are to the point where you just aren't going to make it. And so my scores got to that point in the summer of 2020. And basically they had told me, go home, do what you have to do, go home and rest. You can stay here or you can go home and rest and kind of say your goodbyes. It was one of those, you make your arrangements, if you will. So I did decide to come home. And then I was called within a week after being put on the list that they had received a liver that they felt was viable. What's interesting is the liver itself had hepatitis, so as you well know now, hepatitis can be cured through Gilead's drugs. I think there might be another combination now as well. So the option was to take that liver and then treat it for the hepatitis after to eradicate it. And that was the only real chance I had at that point. So of course I was pretty much done. And you turn colors, right? You jaundice, so you're yellow, and then you kind of start turning to green, and then just it's sideways from there. So I was past green almost at that point. And that's when we got the call. And then I took down to Leahy Transplant Center down in Burlington, Mass.
And I remember that time frame too, because we had not been in touch for a long time. And I think you sent out a LinkedIn message to me, and you're basically saying, hey, you weren't saying like you're going to miss me or anything like that. You just simply said, I'm really sick. And,
nice knowing you.
I'm probably not going to make it. And, of course I respond back saying, look, if I can help in any way, get you to all these centers and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, I'm on the list but it's too late. And, it's quick and whatever. And then you went silent, obviously. And I'm thinking the worst. And then they're like Lazarus, about 6 months later, you reappeared. So you get the liver transplant, and now what? Now they throw you out after 5 days, and now you come home with a bunch of tubes and they throw you in a corner somewhere?
They certainly did. I was shocked. It was, I think, day 6 I was released. I had all the tubes were there. I had, countless staples. You're cut basically from your sternum all the way down to your belly button and then across. They really get you going there. So I had to come home. I was, still bleeding to some extent. It was a lot of pain, of course. So it was like you said, it was literally five, maybe a 6 day, and I was on my way back. So I had to change my dressings, things along those lines, keep them out. And it was a little concerning because I'm up here so far away that I was not close to any real hospital. The hospital here, you can have a Band-Aid and, they'll fly you out of here, but that's about it. So, it might even, we'll leave them alone, but, it was a challenge. It was a lot. It was very hard to get back on your feet, to recover from that. I, at that point, had been very sick for that whole year. So your body was already going through a lot. With all the infections and so forth that came along with it. But, about 6 months later, it started to really turn. You started to feel a little bit better, started to get a little strength. And when by strength, I mean, I could get up and down the stairs, right? You really need to recover. You have usually a full year that they say will take just to get back on your feet. But about 6 months into it, I was ready to go and wanted to start looking, and started about 1 year time. I started working again right after. I couldn't sit still. So back to recruiting.
Just for other people, the 1 or 2 people that may actually watch this.
There's more than that.
All right.
My agent told me this was going to be the Joe Rogan show. I didn't know what happened here. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't want to, I'm a very humble person. I don't want to oversell this thing.
I got you.
For those that might be listening that, God forbid, might be going through, a similar situation down the road. You come home, and do you need full-time care? Somebody's got to be there, I assume, to help you, at least for the first, couple of months. And then if so, let's just go into a little more detail. What are they actually doing for you?
Sure. I mean, you do need full-time care. I had someone here that was helping me at the time. And so, you needed help I lived on the first floor. I didn't want to even bother to try to go up and down stairs. There were too many sutures to really have to deal with that. So I lived on one floor. I didn't get very far the first several months, really up and down just to go to the bathroom. And you need someone to help cook and whatever else to dress you and so forth, bathing. So you can get some nurses that can come in and help as well. But usually a family member is there to help. They're just going to have to, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for them. It's very stressful for them. It's draining for everybody. But you fight through it. You fight through it because there's a lot of bigger things in play, and you just always have that will to survive. And that's what drives you.
And then, and I said this facetiously before, but it's probably true to some extent, 'cause I'm sure you at least have a draining tube, but when they throw you out after 6 days, which is still crazy, but that's in the insurance world for you. You know, are you coming home with an IV line still? Or are you coming home with antibiotics that are IV? Like what is it that you're going to come home with?
Yeah, I came home with transplant medicine, and I didn't come home with the antibiotics. I didn't have any issue there. But you're right. I had several tubes. I had still had everything was still draining bile and so forth, whatever was draining out of there exactly. I had to change that as well as keep an eye on it to make sure that everything didn't reopen. I think I had 2 or 3 tubes. I actually took a video of myself changing all. People are like, why? I'm like, well, you kind of want to look back and remember, and one day you might want to sit there and say, you need to be thankful. And if you ever lose that thankfulness, you have to sometimes remind yourself.
Sure.
So occasionally I'll take a peek back and say, remember what you went through, remember what you want and what you want to go through, and how you want to continue to help support the family and just continue to live. And that's really what it is.
And are you able to, during this time, do you have to sleep in the chair at night upright, or can you actually lay down and sleep?
I slept in a recliner pretty much. The nice couple of, the dogs would hang out with me, and we just sit there and watch TV and, just sleep in the recliner as best you could. It wasn't very comfortable, but you really didn't want to move either. So it was nice to kind of prop yourself, kind of pivot and put some pillows around you, just to kind of keep you in a little cocoon type state, so you didn't really move and open up those sutures in the beginning, especially.
Yeah. And then obviously you said 6 months later, you could start, becoming a little bit more mobile and what have you. And if you were going to advise somebody that's going to go through this, knowing what you know now for that recovery piece of it, especially for the first 6 months, is there anything that you would offer as tips, or what you would have done differently to potentially help with the recovery quicker?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I mean, I think I would have taken more help. People were offering to help, but I was too stubborn. I can do this myself. I can do as much as I can myself. I think that's just my nature. I would always tell people, listen, people want to help. They want to be involved. Let them help. A faster recovery will be for letting people do what they're there to help you with, rather than trying to do it yourself. You listen to the doctors. They know best. You might feel I can beat this or I can do that. And, I was lucky. I mean, realistically, I've not had any complications, knock on wood, since the transplant. So I'm blessed from that angle. And I do, it's not lost on me that some people have complications right from day one after the transplant. So it's really just listening to the doctors, doing everything they say, trying to maintain and making sure you're eating properly to get your strength back, things along those lines. And then that will come naturally. The rest of the healing will come. But getting that help from whoever might be, and it might be a phone call. Honestly, you're pretty lonely when you're there all day by yourself. The TV doesn't talk back necessarily. And so just taking phone calls. It's probably a lot easier now with all the social that's out there, and people stay in touch tremendously. I mean, that was only 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, but still in the moment, it's whatever you can do to stay engaged and keep your mind moving forward. That's probably the best advice I can give.
That's great advice. When you got the call for the transplant, you have to be within a 3 or 4 hour radius of getting to where you're going. So I'm assuming there wasn't a major snowstorm at that point in time, and you can get to where you're going.
Right. Yeah. It's about 3 hours, just on the cusp of it, to get from where I am in New Hampshire down to Leahy Transplant Center. So it's about 3. And we made it there in time, of course. And then we sat there for 12 hours. So they got you there, you're ready to go. And then they prep you, and, you're no eating, no anything. And you're just sitting there waiting for it. But that's what happened. It was basically the liver came from someone somewhere down in Florida. So, once that's identified, they have to fly the organ up, get it all timed out and everything, and making sure, obviously they made sure it's a match prior. So, again, lucky that it was a perfect match. Doctor said they couldn't have asked for a nicer, better match. And it was, due to an unfortunate accident by somebody else, that I'm here today.
So after the 6 months, you get back to work, within a year after that. So when was the time frame where you felt like perfectly normal again and you could just do whatever you wanted to do?
It was about 18 months, actually. The first 6 months, just trying to get my strength back. And I would remember when I was outside eventually, when I could go out on my own and start to drive on my own after that, and I would be winded just walking up and down stairs. You're still really, really beaten up from, and it's not just the transplant, it's the years being sick before it too, or however long that duration would be for depending on who it is. But it was really probably a year and a half before I started to really feel like, okay, I can start to do things again. I can get back to the gym. I can lift some weights. I remember just trying to carry my first case of water into the house, and I could take a nap, so it was amazing how much your body really kind of falls apart, if you will, when you just can't use it. And so about 18 months, I was feeling really good as well and started to resume pretty much all normal activity at that point.
And there's no restrictions, right? The doc said you could just go back and just do whatever you want to do.
Correct. Yeah. As long as there weren't any other complications or things along that, we absolutely had the green light to go do what I needed to do.
Cool. That's great. What's changed you, I guess, from having to go through this experience?
You have to, I've always had an appreciation for family. And I think you really even have a much deeper appreciation when you get sick. It's a tough thing to go through, and people go through worse. But I really think that it's changed more to really focus, especially on my boys. They saw me numerous times carted out of the house in an ambulance and taken away, and probably thought, is dad ever coming back? And so that's also not lost on me. And, the goal for me, when I got better, was to make sure that I had all my efforts and any energy that I had left to really dedicate to them so they can also heal. It's me healing physically, it's them healing potentially emotionally based on watching their dad, who at that time they were younger teenagers, kind of go through that not knowing. So I'm sure that's pretty scary for them as the boys and other family members that witnessed it. So I think that that's a big part that what kept me going all the time was always knowing I had to get home for the family. And that always continues to drive me even today.
Here's a hot take on some 50 Cups tea.
Our English breakfast tea is known to be great for body and heart health, as it contains polyphenol antioxidants, which help lower inflammation, it also promotes heart health, and is full of micronutrients like potassium, which helps nerve contractions, magnesium and phosphorus help bone health, and folate, which helps the production of red blood cells.
Visit 50cupstea.com to find out more.
And obviously, with the exception of you didn't want to die, how were you reconciling the fact that you might die during that time? What were you thinking?
I personally went through a period where I was so sick, it didn't matter. I wasn't depressed, but I said, if this is it, then this is it. How much more are you supposed to go through? Right. When you're that sick, and with all the complications that I had, and the different infections and sepsis and all different things, I had everything. Even some heart issues they looked into that was going on. So everything was kind of falling apart at once. And at that point, you're trying to go as hard as you can, but you also kind of realize you might not make it out of that. And what do you do? When you just try to keep your faith with it, and you just try to stay strong through it. And that's really all I could do at that time. It wasn't up to me at that point. It was in God's hands at that point.
That's an unbelievable story. So today you're working, you got the boys, and I know they're older now. And
yes,
that of course presents itself with different parenting dynamic than when they were younger. But if you look back on it, what are probably the top three things that you learned along the way?
In terms of the boys, or in terms of the
parent with the boys being sick, et cetera?
Yeah. Again, I know I keep going back to it. I think one of the top things is always to just make sure that the dedication is there to the family. I never lost sight of that, with making sure that everyone was taken care of. I think the one of the other things I would always say that I wanted to get back to, which I got away from, which I'm back now, is with the church. I did get away from church when I moved up here, just because I'm Greek Orthodox, and there's I don't know, there's a couple Greeks up here, but there's no real church. I could have started one probably, but I have found one down in Maine. It's about an hour and a half away. It's but make a day of it. I think that that's a big takeaway. I didn't lose faith, but I got away from, attending and so forth. So I'm happy to say that I'm back with that. those are the big things. Honestly, Jim, those are really the only things that matter. You can't take any of this with you. You can't take money with you. You can't do anything. You can be benevolent. I've become very giving back. It's one of the big things I do up here. A lot of giving back to the community in different ways, whatever way I can, whether it's volunteering. One of the stories that real quickly on a side note is when I got sick, when I came back from the transplant, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I'd go back to recruiting. So I went out and bought an ice cream truck from Massachusetts. So a full-fledged, big old Pete 30 ice cream truck. And people look, who wants ice cream when it snows 6 months, right? That's what your next question is going to be. Well, they all do. So I wasn't sure. I figured if I couldn't go back to work physically, I might be able to sit on the truck and give out ice cream, right? So, the ex-wife, because there is an ex-wife involved in this story here, but the ex-wife, I think, when she saw that pull up at that time, I think that might have been the last straw.
What did you do? Just go around playing that dumb jingle and
many dumb jingles, lights, everything you need. I could feed this whole town with ice cream. So I did try it in the very beginning, went around, found out the town didn't want you going anywhere. You weren't even supposed to, due to the certain laws they had here, not even drive it. But I said, who's going to pull over the ice cream truck? Nobody. So go around a few places, give out some ice cream. And I quickly realized this is a very big money losing business. It's a really cool truck and it's really fun to drive, but it's not a really good idea. So I pivoted very quickly after the first year. I said, I need to make sure I'm recruiting, which I always have loved. And the ice cream truck is still here. And now what I do with it is we do free ice cream socials for the senior centers, for the Alzheimer's Center, the rec center. I coached many years when I came up here. So heavily involved with all the give backs there. The police station does a touch a truck for Halloween. So we gave out about $5,000 worth of ice cream on Halloween. It was a good idea. Thank God it was hot. But things along those lines. So we try to do, that's a big part of what came out of this. You asked earlier is, being benevolent, giving back. Again, can't take any of it with me. And that's how I look at things now.
Yeah. Well, ice cream truck. That's a funny story. And I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I was at a park with my son and his kids, my grandkids, and the ice cream truck pulls up and he's playing Christmas carols, and it's March, so I don't, at least play the right music. That's pretty cool that you're doing the free ice cream now. Hopefully the town's not busting your chops about that.
No, it's like I said, doing the local event at the police station. Everyone knows that I'm there and I'm not looking to make money. I'm just giving out the free ice cream. So again, no one really bothers the free ice cream guy. So
Sounds great.
Fun.
So we always end with 5 takeaways, right? 5 things. Could be about life, could be about health, could be about whatever you want, that you want to espouse your wisdom to the Joe Rogan audience that's going to be watching this. So I'm going to throw it back to you.
You had mentioned hot takes or things along those lines, some of the things that, what's wisdom. Again, I think speaking in general terms, you have to appreciate life. You have to appreciate everything in the moment. That doesn't mean go out and make bad life decisions, right? You can't use that as an excuse. You have to always be respectful, love your family closely and your friends as well. I think some of the things you talk about, like that, if you ask me what bothers me, I guess the things in terms of like a hot take or things along those lines is I still, to this day, as much as I've been through, I still get frustrated when I'm in a store and someone doesn't say please or thank you. So I beg everyone, please teach your kids to say please and thank you. I preached that for 24 years, I think, and still do to my oldest. So you will get much further in life if you can just say a simple please and thank you. Those are pet peeves for myself. The other one is I was always taught when you walk in front of somebody, let's say you're in the supermarket, you walk in front of someone, you always say, excuse me, if you're entering their line of sight, right? Like a golf game, right? If you're entering that line of sight, it's a no-go. And so you say, excuse me. I'm amazed today at the lack of manners that people have or appreciation for other people in general. You see this all over the world. I mean, you see this all over this country. This country is so terribly divided, and we won't get into the politics of it unless you want to spend another hour doing that. It's a hard no. Not today.
Yeah. Speaking of kids, like one of the hot takes I have on that piece of it too is what I call the puppet kid, which is you see somebody that you know, and let's say the kid's 7 or 8 years old, maybe even older, 10, sometimes even in high school, and you slay a little the kid, and the kid just does this. And then the parent answers for him. And then you ask another question, and the parent answers for him again. I'm like, can you at least train your kid to say hello and answer a question when it's a friendly person, in this case me, who knows the family, speaks? So it's just, that's my hot take today. Like, parents don't spend enough time just raising their kids to function in society, whether they're 7 years old or 15.
No, I agree. I think the critical thinking skills are out the window. Everyone's given up. If it's not in front of their devices, then they just literally don't know what they're doing anymore. I mean, we were raised very differently. We played out in the woods and you learned, and your parents, come home. And if you came home, great, they'd feed you, right? You didn't come home, maybe they'd look for you the next day. I'm not quite sure. But with that being said, today's world is so different. And our youth and our younger kids, I don't believe they're in any way prepared, not just for the work environment, many of them, but just life in general. They can't do anything without mom or dad. Right. As to your point, either answering for them or getting them to do anything, and having them do something around the house is just a challenge in itself. It's poor parenting. It's parenting skills that when a parent thinks that their child is their friend first and not their child's first. And that is one of the biggest pet peeves that I have when I see it. I saw it in even coaching. I was amazed when I came up here and started coaching baseball and basketball. They'd all come up and say, Ted. And I don't know who Ted is. I'm coach. It's things along those lines where it would drive me insane. Or I had a team once where I had 17 kids on a baseball team. It was basically daycare. And so they had that. And I had a mother bring a pizza and try to hand it over the fence to her kid in the dugout. I said, well, I'll take that in my car if you want. But it's amazing what they do to these children and how they basically either helicopter them, right? Either they're hovering, like you said, or they're just doing everything for them. And you're really doing a disservice. They're better off to fail early in life and learn from those failures than sit here and know that someone's going to be a backstop for them, because eventually we're gone and they're on their own.
Right.
And God help them all.
Yeah. Sometimes sooner than later, unfortunately. And, so the best thing you could do for your kid is prepare them. So they're confident, they've learned from their mistakes, and, they can get out there and they can function if they have to.
Yeah. I think the confidence is a huge thing. You have to instill the confidence. I mean, every good parent's going to be hard on their kid if they're really paying attention to an extent, but there's a fine line there between, scolding them versus building confidence. It's a lot easier to build someone up than to break them down technically. And certainly later in life, it's going to serve them much better. So, I think some parents need their own parenting class. It's something that perpetuates itself. It's unfortunate that, you've got generations after generations now doing this. You see parents, you go out to dinner, you want to have a nice talk. You see parents on their devices too, with their kids, and everyone's just looking at their device and not communicating. And this is why nobody can communicate. Everyone's behind a keyboard thinking they're trolling somebody. And it's unfortunate that we can't be this way it used to be without those devices, but it's the reality. It's up to the parents to be responsible though.
Well, maybe you could start a new business, how to parent one-on-one.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be a lot more than that, right? Jeez.
Unfortunately, I don't think anybody's going to come.
No.
So I interrupt you. Is there anything else on your mind before we end?
No, it's great to see you. I'd have a question back to you. How long have you been doing these? And what's the tea about? Maybe you can, for those that are listening, first-time listeners out there.
The tea is kind of like your ice cream truck. I got into the business a few years ago. It's called 50cupstea.com. For those that would love some Earl Gray, feel free to get online. We were in retail for a couple years. We had bought a coffee shop, and we thought we would convert that into coffee and tea. But it was really coffee, and then a little bit of tea, because we found that the customers love coffee. They love it with sugar. They love it with milk. They love it with oat milk. They love it with everything but actually coffee. I mean, just the drinks these days. But nonetheless, I realized pretty quickly after about 9 or 10 months that retail was not me at all. And it's very difficult to make money in it. Unfortunately, we had also set the stage to get a second retail outlet going. So I ended up selling the first piece retail shop, and then the organic one we started, and I didn't like retail any better. And then the landlord rather, decided to put a well-known coffee shop literally 60 feet from me. And they also serve tea. So that pretty much wiped me out at that point in time. So I pivoted to online tea, and basically for the whole messaging is all around health. And tea is actually very good for you. And our tea is all organic. It's customized, and we have different flavors, different blends that are gut health appropriate, stressors, stress reliefs, I should say, not stressors, and other things that will help you. So that's what we're doing right now. And I thought I'd start this hot take podcast and basically talk about life's hot takes, but also feature individuals such as yourself on a regular basis as well. Because at the end of the day, we all have one or two things in common. One primarily thing is we all want to be healthy, and we also want to be social, really. And without those two things, you really can't exist. So that was the reason for this, and hopefully we can spread the word through hot takes and also through, just really good tea.
Y'all, that sounds great. Well, I'll be looking for my package in the mail. Send me a sample, and I'll email me my address. And as long as you promise that when you go on Shark Tank, I can come on with you for a little color combi there for you. So one day you'll get there, right?
Sounds great, my friend. Well, I appreciate the time today, and God bless you and your family. And thank you for sharing your story today. I appreciate it.
Great to see you. Same to you and the family. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining us on Hot Takes 50 Cups. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to visit our website at 50cupstea.com for more great content and delicious organic teas, and listen and watch us on all the leading platforms. Stay connected with us on Instagram at 50 Cups Tea, YouTube, and TikTok. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends. Until next time, keep sipping and stay united.